Hi, I'm Joey Listro with New Britain Roots. I'm here at the New Britain Senior Center in the greenhouse, here to talk to you about seed starting. So you can start seeds basically anytime in the late winter through early spring. If you have a greenhouse, you can start pretty early. We start here the last week of February, and we start by following our seed schedule. Our seed schedule starts with onions, and we want to plan to start the seeds that take the longest to grow. So onions take a very long time to germinate and sprout, so we will start with those, and then we move into some herbs like thyme and oregano, which also take a while to sprout, including lavender. We start with some greens in February, like arugula, kale, cold hardy lettuce, Swiss chard, and we don't plan to grow those in pots. What we're actually planning on is growing these in our high tunnel. So we start them in trays like this because they're easier to manage, and then in a few weeks when they're ready to transplant, we will transplant the greens into our raised beds inside what's called a high tunnel greenhouse. The other things you see here are onions, chives, thyme, oregano. These are long season plants that take a while to germinate and grow, so we start those really early as well. Some of the seeds we planted today are some greens. We have Chinese cabbage. We also have Swiss chard. This is a type of lettuce called cosmic lettuce, which is a mix of different colors, beautiful lettuce. And we also have dill. A lot of these greens will be planted in our high tunnel greenhouse, which is kind of like a cold frame. So it's just a season extension. So if you have that, you could start your plants that are leafy greens pretty early in the year. And then longer season stuff, marigolds, mint. We're experimenting with some flowers, including this butterfly weed. And these types of seeds, you should always read the back with the directions. These germinate better if they're refrigerated. So we have these seeds in the refrigerator, and they're gonna stay in there for about 10 days before we bring them back out into the greenhouse. So what we use to plant our seeds in are these seed trays. This is called a 50 cell seed tray, simply because there's 50 seed cells. And what we do is we fill it with soil. Here's our potting soil. It's topsoil mixed with vermiculite and perlite, all different components that provide nutrients, but also make the soil light and fluffy. You want the soil to be really fine so the seeds have room to germinate, and it's not clumpy soil. So we make sure we work it really nice so it's nice and soft, it feels like a pillow. We place it into the seed tray, and then after we fill each one of these, depending on how the seed is planted, we'll put the seeds in. Most seeds that we plant, most vegetables, we just make a small indent with our finger. We drop the seed in. Some can take a few seeds. If we're doing tomatoes, for instance, that only takes one. And then after we fill the tray with seeds, we take some more soil, we cover it up. Most vegetable plants like about a 1/4 inch deep. So I'm going to show you how to seed. This is called a seed dial, and if you didn't want to use your fingers, it works really well with small seeds like lettuce, you have over here. And the seed dial basically has different sizes based on the size of your seed, and you can adjust it. So I'll take this out. You can see the opening for 1 is the smallest, and the opening for 5 is the biggest. And what I have are Swiss chard seeds. Now these seeds are pretty big, and normally I would just use my hands, but if you wanted to use the seed dial, you can place them in here, cover it up. I'm gonna say that's a number 4. And then you just tap it. And it controls how many seeds you can put in each. If you have small seeds, like lettuce, you put them in the seed dial.
Looks like it might save your seeds too, so you're not putting too many in one.
Mm-hmm.
Very
So then here, this is just an example. I think this is going to be a 2. And then you just use your finger and you just tap it, and you can kind of see how many go in. Now we have popsicle sticks, and if you're doing a lot of these at home, popsicle sticks are really useful for multiple reasons. One is if I accidentally put too many seeds in one, it's a useful tool to take some out. These are big popsicle sticks, but you can get smaller ones. The other reason they're really important is because you need some sort of marker. So when you're done filling your seed tray, you would write the name and variety of what you're planting, as well as the date, and you just put it right at the end of your tray. Planting your seeds, there's a lot of information on the back of the pack, and it includes how deep the seed goes. For most vegetable plants, you want to plant about a 1/4 inch down. So a good rule of thumb is to take your index finger, and your first knuckle is about the depth you want to go with the seed. So what I do is just make a small indent to my first knuckle. So it looks like that. And then I drop the seed in. And then to make sure it's a 1/4 inch down, I don't take the soil that's already in there to cover it. What I do is I take a handful of soil and I make sure it's covered completely, and then I smooth it out. Watering is really important, especially when you're starting seeds. You never want your seeds to dry out completely, so you always want to make sure you're working with moist soil. So when you put your soil into your seed trays, you want to make sure it's at least a little bit damp, so the seeds have a nice wet environment to germinate in. Now, one good rule of thumb for when you start planting seeds, as well as when you have any type of plant growing in pots, is the test you use to see how wet your soil is. So you take a handful of soil and you squeeze it really tight. Now, when you let go, if the soil falls apart completely, it's too dry. And that means you should add water. You grab the soil again and you squeeze it and water drips out. That means it's too wet, so you should add more soil. All right, after you've added more soil or more water, you can take another fist, squeeze it, and if it holds its shape, that means you're ready to go. Now, when you're first starting out with seeds in your trays, you want to make sure not to disturb your soil too much. So it's good to use a setting if you have a hose or if you have a little spray bottle that has a mist to it, to make sure the surface of the tray stays nice and wet. You don't want to use a watering can or a hose that has really strong streams of water, just because it will move the soil on top, and it can also move the seeds around, and that's not good for when the seeds are trying to sprout. When you're first starting out, you want to make sure you water your trays probably every day. This time of year, the sun's still low in the sky, so it's not super strong. But you want to make sure you check in on your trays to make sure they haven't completely dried out. Again, keeping them nice and wet, and you can just pinch the top surface of the soil to make sure they're still moist. To make sure you have the perfect environment for the seeds to germinate.